Hello everyone. In this lesson, we will be talking about reference angles and finding trig functions using reference angles. Reference angles. If an angle is between 0 and 360, that is between 0 and 2 pi radians, the reference angle denoted, say the R in this lesson, is the difference between the angle and the horizontal axis. If an angle is negative, then we calculate its positive coterminal equivalent as between 0 and 360 degrees, or 2 pi radians, and find the difference between the positive coterminal and the horizontal axis. Here are some rules. In quadrant 1, our reference angle is the same as our angle, which is because we're just subtracting x equals 0 from the angle itself. In quadrant 2, we're relating it to the 180 degree line. So it's 180 degrees minus theta, or pi radians minus theta. That is our reference angle. In quadrant 3, we are again relating it to 180 degrees, but we're subtracting 180 from our original angle. So our reference angle will be 180 minus, or angle minus 180, or angle minus pi. In quadrant 4, we are relating it to 360 degrees. So our reference angle will be 360 degrees minus theta, or 2 pi radians minus theta. Let's look at a couple of examples. Find the reference angle is theta has a given measure 320 degrees. 320 degrees, if we're measuring counterclockwise, will fall in quadrant 4. So 320 degrees is in quadrant 4. So we use our fourth rule. So in Q4, we use the rule 360 minus theta, which is 360 degrees, minus 320 degrees equals 40 degrees. And our reference angle is 40 degrees, and we're done. If theta is negative 236 and we're going clockwise, then because it's negative, then we'll end up with negative 236 being in quadrant 2. So we're in quadrant 2. And the rule in quadrant 2, for a positive number, you just subtract from 180. If it's a negative number, then you have to find the positive coterminal, which we do by adding multiples of 360. So for the coterminal angle, we want to do negative 236 plus 360 degrees, and that will give you 124 degrees. So that is the equivalent coterminal positive, but for the reference angle, theta r, we want to do 180 degrees minus 124 degrees, and that is equal to 56 degrees. So 56 degrees is the reference angle for negative 236 degrees. Let's look at another example. And find the reference angle if theta has a given measure of 4 pi over 3. So that's 4 pi over 3. So we want to know which quadrant 4 pi over 3 is in. So if we divide these into pi over 3's, pi over 3, okay, pi over 3, pi over 3, pi over 3. So that is pi over 3, pi over 3, pi over 3, another pi over 3. So 4 pi over 3 is in quadrant 3. 4 pi over 3 is in quadrant 3. So we're in quadrant 3. And so what we want to do with quadrant 3 then is that we want to do subtract pi from pi over 3. So it will be 4 pi over 3 minus pi. And pi we can write as 3 pi over 3. Right? And so our final answer will be a reference angle of pi over 3. Okay? Now for 5 pi over 4, 5 pi over 4, again we divide this pi into fourths. 5 pi over 4 is again in Q3. 5 pi over 4 is in Q3. So we want to subtract 5 pi over 4 minus pi, and then that will give us really pi over 4. Right? Pi over 4 is our answer. So reference angle for 5 pi over 4 will be pi over 4. Okay, let's go with another example. Another example, we want to find the exact value of sine of 240. Sine of 240. So we want to find out where is 240 degrees, and let's find out where is 240. 240 is somewhere in 240 degrees is somewhere in quadrant 3. Quadrant 3, right? And what we want to do is find the reference angle. So find the reference angle. So reference angle for 240. Reference angle for 240. And since we're in quadrant 3, we're going to do 240 minus 180 degrees, which is equal to 60 degrees. Okay, 60 degrees. So the reference angle is 60 degrees. But because we're in quadrant 3, the sine value will be negative. So in quadrant 3, sine is negative. Sine of sine is negative. So the sine of 240 then would be negative sine of 60. Right? And then we can go to find the sine of 60 degrees. Sine of 60 degrees is radical 3 over 2. So that means the sine of 240 will be negative 3 over 2. Right? Let's do the tan of negative 225. Tan of negative 225. So let's do that down here. Tan of negative 225. I want to find the quadrant that 225 is in, but we'll do that. Let's just do the coterminal. That's how we did our. And so that's negative 225. Let's just go through the algebra here. Plus 360. And that will give you 135 degrees. Right? 135 degrees is in, we're in quadrant 2 there. So the reference angle would be 180 degrees minus 135 degrees. That would be 45 degrees. Because we're in Q2 and the tan is negative, so the tan of negative 225, and this is because we're in Q2, not because this is negative, but because we're in Q2, is going to be negative the tan of 45. And so the tan of 45 we know is 1, so that would be equal to negative 1. And we're done. Okay, now let's look at some other problems real quick. The cosine of negative 7 pi over 6. The cosine of negative 7 pi over 6. We want to find the positive coterminal. So the coterminal would be 7 pi over 6, negative 7 pi over 6, plus 2 pi. And 2 pi we can write as 12 pi over 6. So that would be 5 pi over 6. 5 pi over 6. All right. And so what is the reference angle for 5 pi over 6? Reference angle for 5 pi over 6. Right? We're going to subtract 5 pi over 6 from pi because we're in the second quadrant. So pi minus 5 pi over 6. Pi is the same as 6 pi over 6. So that means we're going to be left with pi over 6, right? So we want to find the tan of pi over 6. Right? Tan of pi over 6. And, sorry, not the tan, the cosine. Sorry, so the cosine of pi over 6 would be positive. But this angle that we're looking for, negative, or 5 pi over 6 is in Q2. So the cosine is going to be negative. So cosine of negative 7 pi over 6 is going to be equal to negative of the cosine of pi over 6. And we know that the cosine of pi over 6 was negative, right? Was root 3 over 2. So this answer will be negative root 3 over 2. Okay, recheck that. Negative root 3 over 2. All right, finally, cosecant of 3 pi over 4. Cosecant of 3 pi over 4. Cosecant of 3 pi over 4. And so what we need to do is that we need to find the reference angle for 3 pi over 4. 3 pi over 4 is in quadrant 2. So we want to do the reference angle for this positive angle. We're going to subtract it from pi. Reference angle is going to be pi minus 3 pi over 4. And so that would be like 4 pi over 4 minus 3 pi over 4. That leaves you with pi over 4. Right? And then we know that the cosecant of pi over 4 was radical 2. That was the reciprocal of your sine, and sine we know was radical 2 over 2. So if you flip that, it would be 2 over radical 2, and that gives you radical 2. Okay, but because 3 pi over 4 is in the second quadrant and sine is positive there, so it's going to be the same as a positive value of pi over 4, which is in the first quadrant, and the sine is also positive there. So that's the cosecant of pi over 4. It's the same as the cosecant of 3 pi over 4. So that's going to be radical 2. And that is how you find things using reference angles. And we're done. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe for more videos. Thank you.